Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hello there, Jackie Woodside here, the founder and the host of the Conscious Living Podcast. We are here to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. Thank you so much for joining me again this week for the Conscious Living Podcast and for being one of those people so dedicated and so committed to living life consciously. It is my commitment that a more conscious world creates a better world for everyone. And I appreciate that you are one of the people that values that with me as well. Every week, I seek to bring you messages about life, leadership, money, time, all of the areas in life where we tend to go unconscious. And one of the areas that we sometimes in our busy, too much to do world, one of the areas where we go unconscious is in being intentional, mindful, and yes, conscious of building our networks, creating connections, and really reaching out to people that to offer our help and support, and also to expand our message, our work, our vibration in the world. So today, oh gosh, what a wonderful opportunity and excitement that I have to bring to the Conscious Living Podcast today, Jennifer Cahill. Jennifer and I met in Boston, oh gosh, about 2 months ago, late summer, while she was at an event with Deepak Chopra that she had something to do, I think, with the creation of that event around science and sages. Jennifer is a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Council. She's an executive coach, entrepreneur, speaker. She's been a featured expert on BBC News, ABC, NBC, Fox, E! News Network. I mean, just about everything. And really interestingly, what we'll dive into a bit today, she hosted a 17-part series with Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman entitled Conversations at the Intersection of Cutting-Edge Science and Spirituality. So we have so much to dive into today, Jennifer. I know that your commitment and your passion is around resilience and network and connections. So welcome to the show. That was a long-ass introduction, but there's so much to say about you and how much I admire you and enjoy our time together. So welcome to the show. What else might you want people to know about you as we get started today?
Yeah, thank you. It was so serendipitous getting to see you at Deepak Sages and Scientists. I was there more as a friend, helping him with just getting some friends to that event and supporting him with his Majorca version, which just happened last week. And I just love to connect people, Jackie. It is my joy and my honor. I like to think of myself as weaving the fabric of human connection. And I literally get sent to different places around the world. You said, "Oh, Jennifer, how was it after I saw you 2 months ago landing home?" I said, "Jackie, I've only been home 5 days at a time for little sprints, because I literally get sent to different places. I spend most of my life in prayer and meditation and reflection, and I will intuitively ask myself, is it in my highest and best good to be on Jackie's podcast? Is it in my highest and best good to go to Majorca or Boston?" And I literally changed flights. Even actually, surprisingly, I was at Deepak's thing in Majorca, and I thought I was going to be there for 3 nights, and my intuition said, "Nope, you need to come back a day early." And sometimes I don't know why, but I follow my intuition exclusively. So whatever I'm told to do, that's how I found myself living in Europe in 2020.
Wow. This was so not on our plan to talk about intuition, but I don't
Sorry.
mind. I would like to just go there a little bit and deepen that. Do you mind, Jennifer? Because I
Yeah,
know
please. I'm always game. I'm game for wherever intuition takes us, Jackie.
there
Let's
we
start the
go.
game.
There we go. Great. So if you don't mind, your casual consumer of conscious living might not be at that level of intuitive connection.
Mm.
So, do you mind saying a bit more about how you developed the trust in your intuitive knowledge that when intuition says go home a day early from this event, or go to Boston, or go to Mallorca, or go to Paris, or you have all of these exciting, sexy places that you go to?
I'm not complaining.
I know, right? For real, for real. Oh, Necker Island. You were on
Yeah.
Necker not long ago with Richard Branson and other luminaries. So, yeah. So, can you just say a little bit about your path of coming to discover, hone, and trust your intuition?
I need to give credit where credit's due. Everybody always says, well, why do you name drop? And it's not about name dropping. I always want people to know where the source of wisdom comes from, because I look at it like I'm literally just a channel here receiving wonderful wisdom from luminaries like yourself and other friends and teachers. And so this part of the wisdom actually came from my teacher, David Guillaume from the Kabbalah Center. And I remember about 7, 8 years ago, David and I had, this is the funniest conversation you'll ever have with a teacher. So David gets referred to me. I had been living in LA at that point for about 8 or 9 years, and I had started studying at the Kabbalah Center. And one of my friend Noah says, oh, Jen, you need to work with David. He just moved to LA and is going to be a new teacher there. So he gives me David's cell phone. I called David up. I said, hi, this is Jennifer Hill. I was told you should be my teacher. He said, I don't have time for students. I said, great, I don't have time for teachers. he said, I said, here's what I need. I said, the way I work with my teachers is I'll call you 4 to 5 times a year, laser coaching when I need something. And otherwise, you're on your own. And he said, great, I can work with you then. And so David wound up he has a popular podcast called Weekly Energy Boost that I follow and I love. And he talks about it a lot on that show, of talking out loud to source, whatever you consider source as. It could be your higher self, it could be Gaia, it could be the universe, could be God, whatever you feel comfortable with calling that. And I remember David taught me about 6, 7 years ago, he said, Jen, every day I talk out loud to source about everything. I talk out loud to source about, do I eat a banana right now? I talk out loud to source about, like, do I take my kids to school at this time or at that time? So David was really the catalyst behind that, and that evolved my practice. So right around the same time I started studying Kabbalah about 13 years ago, at the same time, I also began doing transcendental meditation every day. So for me, it was a beautiful entanglement, Jackie, of the meditative practices of transcendental meditation mirrored by the wisdom and knowledge of this deep multi-thousand-year-old wisdom of Kabbalah, where every day for me, how I do it, and the way that I've kind of pulled from David and other wisdom teachers that I've worked with, is I spend about an hour, hour and a half, if I have it all my way. It starts off every morning with a little bit of journaling. I reflect on any dreams. I actually will, speaking of intuition, I'll write out, like this morning I had a disturbing dream, and I'll write out, dear universe, please help me to interpret this dream and understand its higher meaning. And sometimes what comes back is just profound and amazing. So I'll often journal about my dreams or whatever I just want to process emotionally. Then I'll follow that with 10 things I'm grateful for. I might scan some ancient spiritual text called the Zohar. And then I sit down for the meditation practice. And that begins with traditional meditation. I do a little bit of grounding. And I do that for about 35-40 minutes TM. And then I go into heart-focused breathing by HeartMath, followed by inner child work, followed by the last thing I do is I talk out loud for 10-20 minutes to source, as though it's my best friend. Hey, how you doing? God, source, whatever you want to call it, universe. And I ask several questions. Actually, Michael Beckwith, another one of my wonderful teachers, taught me a great practice many, many years ago, probably a decade ago, which is to always, even if you only ask these 2 questions, Michael had it right, every day ask, what is my assignment for today? And what is my purpose today? So without fail, I always ask source those 2 questions. What is my assignment? What is my purpose? Then in order to fine tune and hone my intuition, what I've learned to do is before I go into meditative state, I'll write down a series of maybe 10-20 questions. If you're just starting, maybe start with 5 questions. And some of those questions are very easy, yes and no. And I actually like to cross-check and validate my intuition, how accurate it is. So I'll ask a question, like I think it was one day last week, I had 13 calls booked. So I'll say, dear universe, are all of my calls going to happen today? 13.
In one day.
In one day. I'm not even exaggerating. My record's been 15. So I literally asked Source, I said, Source, are all 13 of my calls going to happen today? No. Now this was really unique. This was last Friday. Source said, I said, okay, which calls are not going to happen? Your 1 o'clock and your 5 o'clock will no show. No joke, Jackie. That is exactly how my day went. I had 13 calls, 2 of which canceled, which were my 1 o'clock and my 5 o'clock. That was like a whole other level of intuition. So I love to do this. And I also, this is a silly one, but for anybody out there who does investments, I started doing this. This is a very embarrassing story to share. But my husband is in cryptocurrency and stuff. So I started doing this with investments like 4 or 5 years ago. I'd say, universe, is it in my highest and best good to buy or sell X or Y crypto stocks, whatever, what have you? And I'd hear yes or no. And I got pretty accurate results. So I started buying crypto like Bitcoin in 2020 or 2021. And every day I would clearly hear yes, no, wait, et cetera. And it worked great until one day I stopped hearing source. I somehow or another disconnected from my intuition. I kept buying Bitcoin when it was 55K and it was terrible. I wound up like upside down for like a year and a half in some investments. So I always tell people, be sure to cross-check your intuition. If you stop hearing it, then you need to pause. So that's just a little behind the scenes.
That's cool. Jennifer, that was so, so helpful. And what I appreciate about what you said is the depth at which you answered, not the depth at which you answered the question, the depth that the answer to the question portrays. Like, you didn't say, I journal every morning. You didn't say, well, I meditate. You're like, well, I journal and I meditate and I talk to God and I have these practices and I have these teachers. So I have to ask you, what time do you get up in the morning?
I let my body naturally wake itself up. So most mornings I'm up at 5 or 6 a.m. And I do sometimes if I'm traveling, like it was driving me a bit crazy last week because Deepaksing in Mallorca, Deepak's meditation starts at 8:30 and Kundalini starts at 7. And so I'm like pulling my hair out because I like to have 1 to 2 hours to luxuriate in the morning of just stillness and quiet. So most of the time I'm naturally waking up at 5 or 6 and then I'm done with most of my morning practices by 7 or 8 a.m. and then I get into my day.
Yeah, same here. It's not the 5 part, but a couple of, my body does not like 5 o'clock in the morning. But the couple of hours of daily practice is, and I really want to highlight that for our listeners. For the casual observer of conscious living who just wants to be a little bit happier, meditate 5 minutes twice a day. For people who want to have a little bit better marriage, journal every day, keep a gratitude list. What I'm saying is for those of us that are really here in the path of awakening to the truth of our divine nature, it takes something. And it is more than a casual practice of the 3 quick things that are going to help you awaken to your divinity. It's not quick. Although it's luxurious, it's a beautiful way to live and a beautiful way to experience life.
Expand time. This was something else. My co-founder of our current company, OptiMatch, Julian Adler, was my business coach who helped me sell the first company. And Jules was the first one years ago, Jackie. We've been friends now and worked together for about 12, 13 years. He said, Jen, did you know you could fast forward or slow down time? And I was like, oh, like it's like shamanic stuff. And I find that by doing this practice, I'm putting the reins of time back into my hands rather than being at the effective time.
Time does, you can absolutely expand and contract time with consciousness, 110%. I don't know if you know my friend Howard Falco, who's an author. He wrote a book called I Am, and he wrote a book called Time in a Bottle. And it's about that notion of how we can use consciousness to have a different experience of time. You and Howard should know each other, by the way. I'm happy to give.
I love that. And you and another gentleman I was just on a call with today, Dr. Manoj, has a company called Happier Me. And he has a whole app that he's created that helps people with all of these practices. I just made a note. I was going to tell you after the show to reach out to him.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. All right, so let's go. So what you're talking about, now I want to go back again for our listeners and highlight this. What you've just talked about, although you didn't use this language, is developing an intimate and robust relationship with the self, capital S self, like so a relationship with yourself. My spouse and I have this joke in our marriage. I'm a raging introvert. I just get so fed with alone time and being alone. And my spouse is equally as raging of an extrovert. And every now and then we'll just look at each other and one of us will say, I miss myself. I miss myself,
I love that. And ironically, this actually ties back into what we had originally said we were going to talk about today, which I call the golden triangle of connection. And this is the secret to humanity. This is what I found, Jackie, and for everybody out there. The golden triangle of connection is connection to self, allows for connection to others, which allows for connection to purpose. And I have found the more deeply that we, just like you said with you and your spouse, that we cultivate, that we nourish, like it is the most important relationship we could have, is our relationship with self and source. And the more we nourish and water and give love and attention to that, everything else just blossoms, just like a garden of life. If you were to look at your life like a garden, if we're neglecting ourselves, we're neglecting our own health, our well-being, our mental health, then that's going to show up as weeds and, chaos, and we're going to get some bugs and rodents in there. But the
exactly.
more we're tending to the garden of our consciousness, the more the garden of our consciousness flourishes.
Exactly. So it is in developing that intimate, robust, engaged relationship with self that allows for this connection to other. But Jen, and you're an expert in this. And by the way, I didn't highlight your company, Om.app, which is a connection networking digital platform that is amazing, and you're having amazing strides with your company. So congratulations on that. So you really are an expert about the science of connection. And I love what you developed of how to know that you're going to be compatible with other people. I mean, maybe that's not the language that you use, but I love what you created with Om.app. But anyway, my point, let me get back to the question. When people, we're living in a time that there's an epidemic of freaking loneliness in our world, right? Doesn't that make you crazy? We are living in a time that there's an epidemic of loneliness in the US, and I know UK, across Europe. What's happening, Jen? What happens when people cut themselves off from or aren't able to create these healthy, robust connections with others, such that we're in a time that there's an epidemic of loneliness?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jackie. It breaks my heart, literally, to see so many people, young people in particular, but us people of all ages. I think that, in my humble opinion, what happened was in 2020, when COVID hit, as jarring as it was for so many of us around the world, we got a taste of intimacy. Many of us, for the first time in our life, it was forced intimacy, granted, but we had this taste of intimacy, of what's it like to not be going to and from work every day, to not be meeting so many friends and out and about, and just to spend time in quiet. Now, when all of a sudden the world just kind of like wound up again, time started fast forwarding and started moving quicker than ever, I think that there was this longing and this despair and this sadness for this moment of sweetness that was gifted to us, of that connection to ourselves, our families, our friends, our most intimate relationships. And I think that with the advent of so many wonderful technologies like the Zooms and podcasts and iPhones and wonderful technologies that allow us to be more connected, unfortunately, I think we're less connected than ever before. And I actually saw this play out in Nepal. So as much as I get to travel to beautiful places around the world, I also love to build schools and to give back, because I always want to be sure that wherever I go, that I'm never lacking of deep appreciation for everything that I get. And something that really stuck with me when I got to Nepal, so I arrive in this village and it is just flourishing. They're all playing drums and covering us with marigold flowers, and we're all going into this village where we're about to build the school. Well, something hit me with those children of all ages who we're building the school for were delighted, Jackie. They were happy, they were blissful. And I found myself thinking in the first few days I was in the village, I was like, how is this possible? They have no running water, they have no electricity, they have no air, they have none of that, they don't even get to eat meat. Like, for anybody who likes to eat meat, it's a luxury of once a month you kill one of the chickens to be able to eat it. So all the things that we take for granted in, for example, a first world country, were just things that like getting to go to school, having water, were miracles for them. So fast forward, I came back to the US and I looked at my nieces, my nephews and family members and people who had children, and I started to ask, why this juxtaposition? Why are the kids in Nepal, who are so remote and have so little, so happy? And why are the children in the US often unhappy, lonely, etc.? And it actually came back to a Kabbalistic principle, which is about earning. If I give you $1 billion right now, Jackie, and you didn't earn it, it's like trying to plug 1,000 watts of light into a 100-watt light bulb. You short circuit it. Mm-hmm. So what I've noticed in other parts of the world, where we're given the opportunity to earn happiness, earn miracles, earn joy, then that creates a greater sense of fulfillment. And I think that the loneliness epidemic is we're giving people too much. Oh, take this, receive that, get likes, do this. Where really the inner fulfillment is, it comes from inside. The more we connect deeply to that appreciation of ourselves and the things that are not materialistic, but to your point, I'm an introvert too. I have a side of myself that all I want to do all day is just spend time in quiet. Like today, my husband was out of the house and we both work from home. And I love days where I have 8 to 10 hours of just silence, like me and the dog sitting around doing nothing, like just working and on calls and stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. I love that time alone. So the loneliness epidemic, people not connecting, what's your understanding of, like, I don't know, the human psychology of what's happened in our world today, and how people have, I guess I do think a lot about the advent of not just the internet, but we don't have to grocery shop. We just click a button. We don't have to go out to have meetings. We just go to our room and click on Zoom. It does, I remember back when I was a child, I was raised in a very, very rural area. And my grandmother had a big front porch in the middle of the little village that she lived in. And people would just walk by and stop by. They used to call it, I'm sure you remember this, calling on people. Well, I think
Yeah.
I'll call on so-and-so. And, now it's like you have to text somebody before you call them on the phone. Right? It's so different. I mean, I was literally in a networking meeting a couple months ago where people were like, I hate it when people just call me up. They don't know if I'm free. Well, I'm like, well, if you're not free, don't answer the phone. You have
It's so true.
here to this expectation that, I mean, and think about it. How often do we just chat on the phone anymore? Or, I mean, heaven forbid, how often do we quote unquote call on people? So what's your thought about that in terms of, human connection and the culture that we're now in?
I think it's a reflection of what we value, and I think we've lost sight of what we value. To your point, there was a value that we used to place on calling on somebody and spending that intimate time with each other. I remember my grandma and I were sitting in the kitchen at our house at one point, and she and my grandpa were married 52 years, and she said, Jenny, problem with your generation is the minute something gets hard, you guys give up. If it's hard, if you can't text a person, it's like how the nerve that you would call before texting, right? And grandma said, your grandpa and I went through 8 years of hard times. She's like, your generation, Starbucks, Amazon, etc. We live in an Amazon generation right now, to your point of groceries and everything being delivered at our fingertips. And I think connection requires a commitment of time to yourself as much as to others. So if you don't spend that time cultivating that connection to yourself, and if you don't cultivate that, then you're not going to be able to provide it to others. That's why I call it the golden triangle of connection, because if you're not connected to yourself, then you're always going to be trying to take energy from your friends, from your podcast listeners, from Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. But the moment you turn it inwards, give yourself that love and intention. I'm a huge fan of inner child work. I teach it to the executives I work with. I talk about it all the time. And I think the other big thing too is that we're motivated too much by the material world of getting those likes, etc., instead of being motivated by developing deep intimacy with ourselves and others.
But I mean, you and I both know most people don't have a deep relationship with self. I mean, look at what's happening in our world, and perhaps that's it. Maybe that's kind of what we're pointing to, that the more people have been materially driven and externally driven, and I wrote a book called Calming the chaos of our world. Everybody's too busy. Maybe that's kind of what over the last few decades has given rise to this sense of loneliness. You talk about motivators, that motivators have a lot to do with our connection. So what do you mean by that? What do motivators have to do with connection?
I've been studying this, Jackie, for most of my adult life out of survival. People often ask me when I do podcasts or interviews, they say, well, why, Jen? Why are you studying human connection? I tell them I had to do it to survive because people didn't make sense to me. So when I was building my first company in the legal recruiting space, I would analyze and I'd look at, why does person A align with person B? Why does person A do this? Why does person B do something else? And it led me to certain insights in human psychology and in psychometric testing, etc., that what if it's not our personalities? I don't know about you, I have friends with wildly different personalities, but what if it's our motivators that align with one another? So I began testing this in the recruiting field, where I had this theory in my head, and the tens of thousands of job seekers I got a chance to work with were kind of like my testing ground in my petri dish to test all of this out in. And I began to notice patterns. That's my gift. I'm autistic and my brain very high functioning, but my brain sees patterns in everything. I love logic and logic puzzles. And so when I started studying this, I was like, wow, there's a there. And sure enough, if I presented something to person A in a certain way, based on their motivators, they would respond better, versus if I presented it to a similar person with the exact same personality, but who's motivated differently, they would respond completely differently. So fast forward, my co-founder Julian actually came to me after we sold the last company and said, Jen, why don't we productize everything you learned and turn this into a mathematical formula and algorithm that the world can use for the betterment of society for matching people based on motivators? So we went off to the races. We created, it took us 8 months to come up with the questions and another year and a half to test the validity of them and to bring in experts, medical experts, about biases and about, whether or not it actually worked, and the effectiveness of the questions and the psychiatric validity of it. And what we found is, if I align you and me based on motivators, even if our personalities are exactly opposite to each other, then that can create greater psychological safety. And what was fascinating is, long before we started doing this, Google in 2012 set out to study all of their teams, 38,000 people, 180 teams across Google, in something called Project Aristotle, where they wanted to figure out, what is the secret sauce to team success? And they thought, Jackie, maybe it's people who like to go out for drinks or live close to each other or at the same age. It was none of that. The number one factor in team success that Google found in that study is psychological safety. And we found the same thing in studying motivators over the last 3 years, and plus the 20 years I was studying it before that, just in my own head, is that if my motivators and your motivators align, there's a natural affinity and psychological safety. And a really fun, sweet story I always like to share is, a dear friend of mine, Amy, I was invited to speak in front of 100,000 people in India last year in December. And so I invite my friend Amy, my husband couldn't join. It was like 4 weeks of travel. And so it's day 3 of Amy and I's trip, where we're traveling for 4 weeks together across 5 countries, nonstop, all over, speaking, etc. And day 2 of the trip, day 2 or 3, Amy says, oh, Jen, she was an early beta tester with us on Om.app. Anybody can go there and take our survey if you want to try it, Om.app/survey. And Amy answers the survey right there while we're in Sri Lanka airport. And it'll automatically tells us who person A matches best with. And I get an email at that exact moment, Jackie, and it says, out of thousands of people in our system, I was her number 3 match. And
Wow.
so Amy and I only call each other number 3 now. We traveled for 4 weeks, 5 countries, sharing rooms, sharing beds, sharing like all over the place, and not a single fight the whole time.
Wow, that is stunning.
Isn't it fun? That's why it's like, people are asking us, they're like, can we use this for dating? We have communities using it. We have businesses using it for hiring. I use it with all my own coaching clients to help with team alignment.
Wow. So you can use it more on the micro level, like you said, for dating or for client alignment, and on the macro level for companies, teams, communities.
Yeah, and so that's what's been really fun, is that's why our dream is to connect 1 billion people. But it's not just connection to others, it's that really important base level of connection to self. That's why anybody who goes to Om.app/survey, you get a complimentary report of how you're motivated. Share it with your spouse, share it with your best friend, because it's that inner understanding. We even give you a list of about 12 questions that you can ask yourself, like, oh, okay, so I'm a high lychee. Everybody says, why do we choose fruits? Because we want it to be neutral. And it's that old adage of, sometimes in relationships, it's literally like one person speaking apple and another speaking orange, even though we both speak English. So let's say I'm a high lychee, it might ask me questions like,
I'm going to interrupt you because I'm not understanding. A high what?
lychee, like a fruit. Lychee, the lychee fruit, like the little Japanese fruits. Do you know those? Lychee.
I do not know that word.
Oh, it's a real fruit. It's Lychee. So that's one of the fruit types, which happens to be my primary motivator. I've retaken our tests 12, 13 times over the last 3 years we've developed it. I'm always a high light G or lead G, however you want to call it. And we're motivated by achievement. So it'll ask me questions such as, have you considered the needs of others? Have you considered this? Like, it'll just give you insightful questions to journal with yourself about, to ask further.
This is so brilliant. I'm going to go. I hope you, if you don't show up on my top 10 or 15, I'm going to be really disappointed.
I'm sure we'll be very well matched, Jackie. And that's been the fun thing. Like, I had two guy friends who are investors in Austin, and I'd really intuitively, this is meant to be based on my intuition, I just get this spidey sense, I call it, of like connecting to people. And I loved it because these two guys, I finally got to introduce them when I was in person in Austin. And it was amazing because not only did they match perfectly after they both took the algorithm, they literally are both investors, both working on the same sort of old car. And it's been fun to see the parallels of how people's lives just seem to intertwine when they have similar motivators.
Wow, amazing. Jen, and when I first met you, it was really stunning to see just the way that you were weaving relationships, weaving connections in your space. How many people just got connected and relationships formed. You clearly are masterful at it, and I've thought of it several times since then, and really admire that skill that you have. Well, I really want to thank you for being here with us on the podcast, and I again want to encourage our listeners, Om.app, app/survey, to go play with Jen's brilliant algorithmic software that will help you really look to see, first of all, the relationship with self, which is where the golden triangle begins, and then relationship to others. And then I love that third part of the triangle, relationship to purpose, how we can all expand our conscious message out into the world. It doesn't have to be as a speaker, author, thought leader, wherever you're planted, as a school teacher, as a daycare provider, as a nurse, as a medical professional. No matter where you are planted, there are places to grow your love, grow your message of kindness and conscious living into the world. So Jen, I'm so glad that our paths have crossed and that we are now in that tree of life connections. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to all your listeners. May you all find the connections that fill your heart with joy, and most importantly, that connection to yourself.
Love that, and so it is.